Captain James Richardson was not looking for world-changing secrets on April 15, 1945. He was just trying to stay alive. The war in Europe was almost over, and he wanted to go home. Richardson was 32 years old, an engineer from Connecticut, with a wife he had not seen in 3 years. He had spent the entire war watching machines break and then trying to fix them. That was his life. Find something broken. Fix it. Move forward. But when his unit rolled into the German town of Ohrdruf that afternoon, everything changed in seconds. The Americans discovered an underground weapons facility carved into the mountain. Not a bunker, not a missile base. A massive underground factory hidden so deep that Allied bombers had never even found it. As Richardson descended into the darkness with his flashlight, his hands started shaking. He was not shaking from fear. He was shaking because of what he was looking at. The first thing Richardson saw was a jet engine. Not broken, not damaged. A complete Me-262 turbojet engine sitting on a workbench like it was waiting for him. He knew what a jet engine was supposed to look like. American engineers had been trying to build one for years. This German engine was incomparably more advanced. The tolerances were so precise that he could barely see the seams where the parts came together. He ran his fingers over the metal and realized the Germans had figured out something that America had not yet solved. But that was just the beginning. Further into the facility, Richardson found V-2 rocket components. These were not theoretical designs. These were finished pieces. Gyroscope systems, fuel injectors, navigation mechanisms that were decades ahead of anything he had ever seen. He found a complete blueprint for a guided air-to-air missile, a missile that could fly faster than any fighter jet in the world and destroy targets from miles away. The Germans had weapons America was not even trying to build yet. Then he found the prototype. A small, sleek aircraft with swept-back wings unlike anything in existence. The design was so advanced that American engineers would not create something similar for 5 more years. Richardson recognized what it was immediately. This was the future of aviation. This was what aircraft would look like when the next war started. And the next war would definitely start. Richardson realized in that moment that he was standing in a time capsule of German military genius. 12 different weapons systems were laid out in front of him. Pulse jet engines, radar components that used frequencies America did not understand, hydraulic systems that were revolutionary, ammunition designs that defied conventional engineering. Every single thing in this facility represented years of German research and billions in resources. He looked at the main German officer who was still in the facility, a frightened engineer named Klaus Steimle, who had stayed behind to protect the equipment. Richardson asked him a simple question in broken German. Where are the technical specifications? Where are the plans? Where are the complete designs? Klaus Steimle pointed to a locked cabinet in the corner of the facility, and he told Richardson something that made his decision immediately. Steimle said that the American command had ordered him to wait. American headquarters had told the Soviet Union what was in this facility. They knew. The Soviets were coming from the east. They would reach this facility in 3 days, maybe 4. The Americans had a choice. They could follow the official protocol, fill out the proper forms, send reports to their commanders, wait for approval from Washington. Or they could disappear with the most valuable military secrets in the world before the Russians got there. The choice was obvious. Richardson made a decision that would destroy his career if discovered. He and his team were going to steal these weapons. Not for money, not for power, for America. He told his men to photograph everything. He told them to take measurements. He told them to disassemble the most important components carefully and pack them for transport. He told them they had 48 hours before Russian patrols would arrive. They had to work fast. They had to work in secret. They had to move 12 different weapon systems and all the documentation out of the facility and back to American-held territory. If they were caught, if this was discovered, They would be executed for treason. The clock was ticking, and nobody knew that the most important night in American military history was about to begin. Private First Class Henry Patterson was 19 years old and terrified, not of combat, not of death, but of one thing: disappointing his family. His father was a factory supervisor in Pittsburgh. His mother had raised 6 children on a teacher's salary. Henry was the first one to go to college. He was going to be the one who made it out. He was going to be somebody. And then the war happened. He joined the army because his brothers were fighting, and he could not let them face it alone. He had been in Europe for 8 months and had followed every single order perfectly. He had never questioned authority. He had never broken protocol. He was the soldier every officer wanted to command. Now Richardson was asking him to commit treason. Henry did not think about it that way. Richardson had not used the word. But Henry understood. They were stealing German weapons, stealing them from the Russians, stealing them from the American army. If they were caught, if this was discovered, if anyone opened that truck and saw what was inside, Henry Patterson would go to military prison for the rest of his life. His mother would never know why. His father would never understand. The story would just be that their son was a traitor. But Richardson had looked at him and said something that made Henry say yes anyway. Richardson told him that every day the Russians did not have these weapons was a day America had to prepare for the next war. And there would be another war. Everyone knew it. The Germans were finished, but Russia would not stop. Russia was the enemy now. And in that truck were the designs for every weapon the next war would be fought with. If Russia got them first, America would lose. And if America lost the next war, it would not be a war. It would be an extinction. Henry Patterson climbed into the truck. His hands were shaking so badly that he could barely grip the steering wheel. He drove slowly through the German countryside at 3 in the morning. The truck was heavily loaded. The springs groaned under the weight of the swept-wing aircraft components. The Me-262 jet engine had been packed in a reinforced steel box that sat in the cargo bed like a time bomb. Henry knew he was carrying the future of aviation. He knew that what was in that truck would change every aircraft built in the next 20 years. He knew that he was carrying secrets worth billions of dollars, secrets that could start wars, secrets that people would kill to obtain. And he was a 19-year-old truck driver from Pittsburgh with no idea what any of it meant. The first American checkpoint appeared out of the darkness at 4 in the morning. Henry saw the flares go up. Red lights, a barrier across the road, soldiers with rifles. He felt his heart stop. This was it. This was where it all ended. Henry pulled the truck to a stop. His palms were soaked in sweat. The barrel of an M1 carbine appeared at his window. Behind it was the face of a military police officer. The officer was maybe 22 years old. He looked exhausted. He had been standing at this checkpoint all night, searching trucks for looted German property. The officer said one thing. "What do you have in the truck?" Henry heard his voice crack as he answered. "Ammunition and spare parts for the rear echelon depot. Standard supply delivery." The officer looked at him. He looked suspicious. He looked like he was about to order Henry to open the cargo bed. Henry understood in that moment that his life had just changed forever. Everything in the next 10 seconds would determine whether he went home or went to prison, whether his family ever saw him again or thought he was dead, whether he was a patriot or a traitor. The officer reached for the cargo bed flap. His hand was moving slowly, deliberately. He was going to look inside. Then something happened that no one could have predicted. A jeep came screaming toward the checkpoint from the direction of the front lines. An officer was standing in the back with a megaphone. There was an emergency, a German counterattack. All non-essential personnel were being pulled back. All supply convoys were being rerouted. The checkpoint was being closed. Every truck was going through immediately without inspection. The military police officer cursed. He waved Henry through. Henry did not hesitate. He stepped on the gas. The truck lurched forward and disappeared into the darkness. Henry's hands were shaking so violently that he could barely keep the truck on the road. He drove for another hour, then another hour, then another. By dawn, he had reached the ammunition depot. He pulled the truck into the parking area. There were dozens of other trucks, dozens of other deliveries. Nobody was paying attention. Nobody was asking questions. Henry climbed down from the truck cabin, and his legs almost collapsed beneath him. He had made it. He had done it. He had carried the secrets of the future through 3 American checkpoints. He had lied to military police. He had committed what amounted to high treason in service of his country. Richardson was waiting for him at the depot. He looked at Henry and said only one thing. "You have a face that looks like you just completed something impossible." Henry did not answer. He just nodded. Richardson put his hand on Henry's shoulder and said something that would stay with him for the rest of his life. Richardson said that what Henry had just done would change the trajectory of American military technology for 50 years. The weapons in that truck would become the foundation for every fighter jet, every missile system, every piece of advanced technology that America would use in the next war. And that next war was coming. It was coming sooner than anyone thought. And when it came, America would be 50 years ahead of everyone else because of what Henry Patterson did on this morning. Richardson could not sleep the night after the last shipment arrived in Connecticut. He lay in a borrowed bunk with his uniform still on, staring at the ceiling while every muscle in his body danced with exhaustion. He kept replaying each moment from the week before, the checkpoints, the pressured interactions with depot guards, the forged documents passing from his trembling hand to indifferent officers. He was waiting for the phone to ring. Klingstein had said, "Done," yet Richardson knew nothing was ever truly done in war until the history books were written. At dawn, Richardson walked outside expecting relief. Instead, he felt dread. Every soldier in the depot eyed him sideways. He forced himself to check the crates one more time, counting the boxes and brushing dirt from their labels. Me-262 jet engine, V-2 guidance components, swept-wing prototypes, the blueprint for what would become the American century. Mid-morning brought the knock. 3 military investigators entered the depot with orders signed at the very top. They did not ask permission. They did not ask questions. The officer in front read from an official sheet. Your actions concerning recovered German military technology have resulted in charges of multiple protocol violations, forgery, removal of classified materials, and suspected theft. Richardson's heart slammed in his chest. Behind the officer, 2 soldiers waited with rifles already unslung. Richardson felt the urge to run, but he stood absolutely still. He was taken outside, hands shackled. The sun was harsh. Richardson tried to find Klingstein in the crowd, but the engineer had disappeared. He looked for Patterson, but the young soldier was gone too. No one would look at him. No one spoke. Richardson was pushed into a waiting jeep and driven to a makeshift holding facility. The vehicle rattled across cracked pavement while Richardson's mind ricocheted through everything he had sacrificed. He thought about his wife. He thought about his father. He thought about the possibility that his name would be erased from every history book, remembered only as a traitor. Inside the holding cell, a military officer read the charges again. Richardson stared at the wall as the officer described the penalty for each act: a dishonorable discharge, loss of pension, federal prison, and at the end, execution for treason. Richardson's mouth was dry, but he tried to memorize the order of words. He would not beg. He would not plead. He had always believed that you did what was needed, even when nobody thanked you, even when nobody understood. Outside, the guards whispered about his fate. Some thought he was a hero. Others thought he deserved to be shot. Richardson closed his eyes and waited for the verdict. The fate of American air power, the fate of military technology for the next half-century, now depended on whether anyone in that room understood what had really happened in Ohrdruf. When General Leslie Groves walked into the courtroom and requested a closed session with the tribunal, the prosecution fell silent. No one challenged him. Groves was the man who built the atomic bomb. He had more authority than most generals. The court adjourned for 90 minutes. Richardson was left alone in a holding cell during that time. He sat on a metal bench and tried not to think about execution. His wife did not know where he was. His family thought he was dead or imprisoned forever. He had broken every oath he had sworn. He had forged documents that could be traced back to his hand. He had stolen from his own military. And there was no excuse he could give that would make any of it legal. The tribunal reconvened. The charges were quietly dismissed. No explanation, no apology. Richardson was transferred that same day to a classified research facility in Connecticut. He was not released. He was not exonerated. He was simply moved into a different kind of prison, a gilded one, a prison where he would work as a civilian engineer on recovered German weapons technology and never speak about what he had done. For 3 weeks, Richardson lived in a small apartment near the facility. He received a salary but did not spend it. He received letters from his wife but did not open them. He received visits from Klingstein but barely spoke. He existed in a state of suspended animation. He had sacrificed everything for a country that could not acknowledge his sacrifice. Then on a Tuesday morning in May 1945, Klingstein arrived with news. The German weapons had been analyzed. The swept-wing designs had been studied. And something had been confirmed that changed everything. The German engineers at Ohrdruf had discovered something that no American had theorized yet. They had cracked swept-wing aerodynamics. They had eliminated shockwave problems that had plagued American designers for years. They had solved problems that would have taken American engineers another 5 years to overcome on their own. Klingstein opened a briefcase and showed Richardson the result, a blueprint, the X-47 concept, an aircraft that used every principle from the German designs but integrated American materials and manufacturing techniques. It was not a copy. It was a synthesis. German genius filtered through American capability. Klingstein looked at Richardson and spoke carefully. The survival of American air power depends on designs you risked everything to protect. The next war starts within 6 months, maybe a year. When it does, every American who comes home alive will owe their life to what you did. Richardson said nothing. He stared at the blueprint and realized that his sacrifice had not been in vain. It had just been invisible. 5 years later, in 1950, the Korean War began exactly as everyone had predicted. The Soviet Union and China attacked American positions with aircraft that were a generation behind current technology. But American pilots flew fighters based on the swept-wing principle. The F-86 Sabre became the aircraft of the Korean War. It was faster, it was more maneuverable, it was 2 generations ahead of anything the enemy could field. In October 1950, Captain James Mitchell was flying his F-86 Sabre over North Korea when he encountered a Soviet MiG-15 fighter. The MiG-15 was the best aircraft the Soviet Union had ever built. It was new, it was fast. It should have been a fair fight. But the Sabre had the swept-wing design, and in that moment above the frozen mountains of Korea, the German technology changed everything. Mitchell dove hard, and the Sabre responded with power that seemed impossible. The wings cut through the air with an efficiency that no MiG-15 could match. Mitchell pulled up. The MiG pilot tried to follow. He could not. The swept-wing design gave the American aircraft an advantage that was overwhelming and decisive. Mitchell fired. One burst. The MiG exploded. The Soviet pilot died instantly. This same scene played out 17 times in that single day over North Korea. American Sabres destroyed 17 MiG-15s without losing a single aircraft. It was not a fair fight because the technology was not fair. The Germans had solved aerodynamic problems that made American jets almost supernatural in their maneuverability. And it was all because one engineer had risked everything to steal those solutions. Richardson never knew about the 17 kills over North Korea. He never read about it in the papers because it was classified. He never told anyone what he had done because it was forbidden. He worked quietly as a civilian engineer on aircraft design for 30 years. He watched American military power grow from technology he had protected. He watched a new war beginning with Russia and understood that what he had done in 1945 had determined the outcome. In 1988, at the age of 75, Richardson lay in a hospital bed. His body was failing. He had lived a quiet life. He had never married again. He had never had children. He had only had work. On his final night, a young Air Force officer appeared at his bedside. The officer told Richardson that his classified record had finally been reviewed, that historians now understood what he had done, that the weapons he had protected had been worth billions in development time saved, that the lives saved in Korea alone numbered in the tens of thousands. The officer took Richardson's hand and said something that made the old engineer cry for the first time in 43 years. The officer said that the story would be told now, that he would not die unknown, that the next generation of Americans would know what he had sacrificed. Richardson closed his eyes and understood that his choice in a German bunker had rippled through history in ways he could never have imagined. He had been a traitor to the military. He had been a patriot to his nation. And now, finally, the world would know the difference. James Richardson died alone. That was the fact that mattered most. Not his age, not the disease that killed him, not the quiet hospital room with beige walls and a window overlooking Connecticut fields. What mattered was that no one was there when he took his last breath. No wife, no children, no grandchildren holding his hand. 75 years of life reduced to a single moment of solitude. For 32 years after the war ended, Richardson had worked in classified facilities. He had designed aircraft. He had analyzed captured German technology. He had mentored younger engineers who would never know that everything they learned came from the knowledge he had protected. He lived in a small house near his workplace. He bought coffee at the same diner every morning. He was a ghost in the machinery of American power, present everywhere, known nowhere. The house had been empty, no photographs on the walls, no letters on the shelf, no family portraits, just engineering textbooks and blueprints and the accumulated weight of secrets he could never share. 43 years of silence. 43 years of building American military technology while watching the nation grow stronger and never being able to tell anyone why. Every F-86 that flew in Korea carried his legacy in its wings. Every fighter jet that dominated the Cold War was built on foundations he had stolen and protected. But the world did not know his name. The world knew the names of generals. They knew the names of pilots who shot down enemies. They knew the names of defense contractors who built weapons. They knew the names of politicians who made decisions about war. They did not know the name of the engineer who had risked execution to save them all. In 1988, an Air Force officer appeared at his deathbed. The young man was nervous. He carried a folder marked classified. He told Richardson that certain records were finally being reviewed, that historians were beginning to understand what he had done, that his actions had been calculated as worth billions in development time, that Soviet missile systems had been inferior for decades because of the technology gap he had created, that thousands of pilots had lived because their aircraft were superior, that American military dominance in the Cold War had been determined by one choice made in darkness. The officer tried to comfort him. He said that the next generation would know, that his children would understand, that history would eventually record the truth. But Richardson had no children. He had no one to pass the story to except the classified archives that would lock it away until after his death. Richardson closed his eyes and tried to find peace in that knowledge. His life had mattered. His sacrifice had been weighed and measured and calculated in the equations of national power. But no one would ever thank him. No one would ever build a memorial. No newspaper would ever print his name. He was a ghost who had shaped history without ever appearing in it. He died that night. His heart stopped at 11:47 p.m. A nurse found him in the morning. There was a small notation in the hospital records. A retired defense engineer. No next of kin. No funeral arrangements pre-planned. He would be cremated. His ashes would be scattered. He would leave behind nothing but secrets and silence. But the secrets did not stay hidden forever. In 1998, a National Security Agency historian discovered Richardson's name in declassified documents about the Ordre facility. In 2005, an academic paper was published detailing how American engineers had reverse-engineered German swept-wing aircraft designs. By 2015, an entire book had been written about Richardson and the classified weapons program. By 2020, the story had spread across the Internet. YouTube videos, academic journals, historical forums. The man who had lived in obscurity was suddenly known to thousands. Yet his name still appeared in no official military histories. No statue was erected. No medal was awarded posthumously. No apology was issued for the decades of erasure. The military simply acknowledged the facts and moved on. Another historical curiosity. Another classified file finally released. Another forgotten hero briefly remembered before being forgotten again. Today, you know his name, Captain James Richardson, an engineer who looked into a German bunker and saw the future, who chose to steal that future for his country, who risked execution, who sacrificed everything, who lived in silence, who died unknown. Every fighter jet that flies today carries his fingerprints in its design. Every American military advantage in the skies is built on foundations he protected. Every pilot who came home alive owes their life to what he did. But they do not know his name. They will never know, because the laws he broke were real, because the theft he committed was genuine, because the country he saved cannot afford to celebrate the treason that saved them. That is the cost of being invisible. That is the price of doing what must be done when no one can ever acknowledge it. That is the weight James Richardson carried for 43 years. He knew he had saved the nation. He knew that history would judge him as a hero. But he died knowing that history would judge him as a criminal first. The question is not whether he was right or wrong. The question is whether a nation can owe everything to a man it can never recognize. Whether gratitude can exist in silence. Whether sacrifice means anything if no one ever knows you made it. Whether the laws we break for survival are forgiven by the survival they create. James Richardson asked himself that question every day for 43 years. And in the end, with his last breath, he understood the answer. It does not matter. What matters is that he did it anyway. If you believe history should know forgotten heroes like James Richardson, subscribe for more untold stories. Leave a comment telling me which story surprised you most. Because some truths demand to be remembered, and it takes an audience that cares enough to share them.